This is a Unit 1 Cold War Key Topic 3 revision video, and it really focuses on the collapse of the USSR. Okay, so fundamental to the collapse is Gorbachev and his new approach of perestroika and glasnost, which is supposed to save communism, but it ends up undermining it and eventually bringing about the downfall of the USSR as a superpower. Now at the top there you can see the Sinatra Doctrine. This is the name given to the idea that the USSR is going to give satellite states more freedom. It was apparent very early on that Gorbachev had abandoned the Brezhnev Doctrine, which had said that they had the right to go in and intervene in any satellite state that threatened to bring down the Warsaw Pact or the Eastern Bloc. Well, for economic reasons, the USSR gives those satellite states more freedom, and he withdraws Soviet troops. So he's lost a key element of control over those satellite states. And reasonably quickly, democratic elections are announced in places like Hungary. And Gorbachev accepts that Hungary, for example, can become a multi-party state, and that it is their right to have democratic elections if that's what they choose. Well, as soon as the democratic elections are announced, there's a big movement of East Germans to Hungary. They're trying to get out from behind the Iron Curtain, maybe get into Austria and to freedom in the West. Now, at this point, lots of East Germans are leaving for West Germany via Hungary. There has been very few announcements from the East German government in terms of adopting more freedoms. And there are big protests in East Germany and in East Berlin. And in response, the East German Communist government announces greater travel freedoms. It's not fully clear, but it's assumed that they didn't intend to bring about the end of the Berlin Wall. But that is exactly what happens due to the level of protest and the number of people trying to get out. In fact, the East German government had banned Russian publications because they thought the Russians, the Soviets, were offering up too much freedom. And on the 9th of November, the East German government announced that East Germans would be allowed to cross the border with West Berlin. So the checkpoints in the wall are flooded, people began to chip away the wall and dismantle it, and they open up 10 new border crossings. And when the Berlin Wall falls, that is a hugely symbolic moment, because that wall had symbolised the division. Once the wall has gone, then you're on the path to reunification. And similar stories happened in Poland, where Solidarity, the Free Trade Union, won the election in 1989, and in Czechoslovakia with the Velvet Revolution. So all the satellite states begin their bids for freedom. This results in the end of the Warsaw Pact, and military cooperation ceased in 1990. So there's no longer the NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. And it was back in Malta, at the Malta conference, that Bush and Gorbachev had announced that the Cold War was over. So there was no longer the Cold War, and this is the collapse of the USSR. So many people back in the USSR were quite upset with what Gorbachev had brought about. He didn't intend to, and when he was out of the country, something called the Gang of Eight coup happened. This is 8 senior communist government officials who tried to remove Gorbachev from power, and he was prevented from returning to Moscow. And they try and overturn the freedoms gained under perestroika and glasnost. Now, the new government only lasts 3 days because the president of Russia, a man called Boris Yeltsin, basically said it was illegal, and he asked people to resist it. And when Gorbachev does come back, he tries to introduce a new constitution, giving the Baltic states more freedom but keeping them within the USSR. Well, they reject that. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, that they want their freedom. And as a result, Gorbachev announces the end of the USSR and he resigns on Christmas Day 1991, and that is the end of the USSR as a superpower. It's the end of the Cold War, and the Iron Curtain falls and the satellite states have gained their independence and the map of Europe looks totally different.